Good morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Home in Progress, sponsored by RepcoLite Paints and Benjamin Moore. And I've got to pause for a second before I tell you about the show. Before I get into all the good home improvement stuff, the weighty things that we'll talk about, I've got to talk about something silly and dumb because I embarrassed myself the other day. And for any of you who know me, that's saying something. Not because I'm infinitely confident and embarrassment just runs off my back. That's not it. I don't embarrass easily because I've spent pretty much a lifetime doing ridiculous, embarrassing things, and I've gotten used to it. Really doesn't surprise me anymore when I do something like that. Usually, that was not the case this week. Here's the scoop. The other day, I'm at church, and I look down, at the little worship aid that they gave me when I walked in, because we're singing, whatever hymn. And when I look down, I spot, and this is hard to explain, but my eye sees this really blurry, random hair that's shooting off of my face. From some point in my face, it's shooting off. I just happen to see it. It's like when you see your own nose, right? It's blurry. You don't focus on it all the time, but it's there, kind of lurking. You know what I mean? I see this random single hair shooting off of my face. And my first thought was, is that a hair from my beard? And why isn't it hanging out with all the other ones? Why is it shooting off in a weird direction? What's up with that? So I reach up to gently force it back into place, to nudge it back into, compliance. But here's where things take a really frustrating turn for me. I can't find it, with my hand. I can see it, but my depth perception is off. Or it's too blurry, or, all of those things. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. I can't find it. So I keep trying. And I'm pawing randomly at my face. I'm closing my right eye so I can look straight down my nose with my left eye and try to pinpoint this rogue, obnoxious hair that is all of a sudden consuming every single thought that I've got. Every single ounce of energy is entirely focused on this one hair. And then it hits me like this huge wave of concern. It hits me. What if the hair isn't, in fact, a beard hair? That's just obstinately sticking up in the wrong direction. What if it's a huge nose hair that's coming out of hiding, right? I'm sorry. I know it's early for some of you, but that's really what's going through my mind. What if it's a nose hair? What am I going to do? So I step up my attempts to find this hair and wrangle it back into obedience. I'm touching my beard. I'm stroking my face. And then, because I completely lose sight of the fact that I'm in a public setting, I start pawing at my nose. I'm poking at my nostrils. I'm doing, oh man, you can only imagine. Whatever you're imagining, I'm doing that. Completely forgot where I was. I'm waving my fingers all around my nostrils, trying to see if I can feel a hair, either on my fingers, or I thought this was so strategic. I thought maybe by brushing it, I might somehow trigger a tickling effect in my nose, and thereby I had at least pinned down where it was coming from. Well, I carried on like that for a while, and when that didn't work, and of course it didn't work, when it didn't work, I realized the whole thing could be closer to my eye. Maybe it's just an eyelash, because it's blurry. I can't tell where it's coming from. So I start pawing all over my face now, my eyes, my eyebrows, you name it. And guess what? For anybody who cares, that was it. Rogue eyelash. I found it and I was staring at it on the end of my finger, probably like somebody who's just landed this huge fish, in a huge fishing battle, or, if you're a hunter, you can figure out what the analogy is that works for you. I'm looking at this hair like I have just conquered the world. And that's when it dawns on me that I'm in a social setting surrounded by people. I've been manhandling my own face for about 10 minutes at this point, and I just freeze. My finger's still extended with the eyelash on it, and I'm frozen. And because I've got no common sense whatsoever, no social skills at all, I slowly turn my head around, in every single direction I can. And I look at everybody to my right and to the left and off to the sides behind me. At least I didn't fully turn around. But I'm looking at everybody, as much as I can, swiveling my head. I lock eyes with 4 different people who clearly have been observing and wondering what in the world I was doing. And because there's no limit to the social awkwardness that I possess, I started to lift up my index finger with the hair on it so they could see that I had found it. I almost mouthed the word, "it was a hair." The words, "it was a hair." But thankfully, I froze at that point again, and I realized that was going too far, even for me. So anyway, it was awkward, so awkward, but I did survive it. And now I'm stronger, right? I'm stronger for that experience. Anyway, enough of that. It's time to get to the show. This week, we're going to be continuing that series on memory management. This week, we're going to look at how to clean up all the physical items that we've saved over the years. Our kids and our grandkids, all of those things, the school projects, the birthday cards, the artwork, the first Crocs they wore. All the things that we save, their favorite pacifier, you name it. We've all got boxes and boxes of stuff like that, or at least lots of us do, and sometimes it gets out of hand. How do you pare it all down and organize it in such a way that you can find the things that you want to find and enjoy those memories, rather than just have them stored away in boxes? We're going to talk about all of that. We're also going to be doing a Paint 101 class so you can confidently know everything you need to know to pick the right paint for any room in your house. But before we get to that, we're going to talk about a crazy cool $8 tool that you might need in your toolbox. We'll get to that right after this. Home in Progress is brought to you by RepcoLite Paints and Benjamin Moore. People often think of paint as just another line item on the project supply list. But here's the thing. Everything you do, every hour of prep, every stroke of the brush, all comes down to the quality of the paint. The paint is the project. Make sure it's the best. Right now, I want to do another Winter Woodshop series segment. If you remember, a while back, I started this Winter Woodshop series, and we talked about different finishes. Went through 3 different, segments in a row over 3 different weeks. We talked about different finishes. Today, I want to revisit that whole series and talk about a tool that I'm betting most of you don't know anything about. But it's something that you should go out and buy. Just rush out and buy one right now. Well, in a minute, after I'm done telling you about it. You're going to find a ton of uses for it, and best of all, it's something that's usually going to cost less than a lunch, right? So not expensive. You're going to use it all over the place. It's a card scraper. And I don't know if, like I said, does anybody even know what I'm talking about? You're forming a visual of it in your mind, and you're probably not right. On the surface, it really is about as boring as it gets, but if you ever refinish furniture, if you hate sanding, if you hate all the dust that sanding creates, this is something to check out. And here's my home in progress promise from RepcoLite. RepcoLite standing behind this. When you've got one of these and when you know where and how to use it, you're going to find yourself stopping mid-project over and over and thinking, I am so glad that little guy on the radio told me about this. All right, so card scraper, what is it? Well, when you look at one, it doesn't look like much of anything. It's basically a hunk of thin, flexible metal about the size of a playing card. They're made of hardened steel. If you didn't know any better, you really would just assume this is a hunk of scrap metal. It's just a hunk of junk that's sitting around in somebody's shop. I've seen them being used in woodworking videos in the past, and I just figured the guy was using this hunk of metal to scrape the wood, something that he had sitting around. They're that basic. But once they're prepared properly, something almost magical happens with these things. Along the edges of the card, you've got 4 edges. You can do this to all 4 of these sides. You prepare them by creating a tiny hook. It's microscopic, really. And hook probably isn't the right word. Call it a burr. That's the proper term. And that burr turns the scraper into a cutting tool. Now, don't get hung up on everything that I just said right now. As you're trying to make that make sense, don't worry about it. Just roll with it. I'll explain it later. It'll make sense as we go. The big thing is that when it's sharpened properly, when you pull it across the wood, it takes off whisper-thin, curly shavings, like a hand plane, right? Think of it as a mini hand plane, but with so much more finesse than a hand plane. And also, it doesn't care about which direction the grain is running. And that's a big deal, especially on figured wood, things like burl or bird's eye, where the grain twists and swirls instead of running straight. They're incredibly practical, these card scrapers, incredibly practical in that regard in a lot of different woodworking applications. Now, all right, I've already mentioned that they're inexpensive, but they are easily one of the most inexpensive upgrades that you can make to your shop or your tool bin. A basic rectangular card scraper is usually going to cost about $8 to $12. That's it. A small set of them might run 20 to 30. Sometimes that set's going to include the burnisher that you need to sharpen it, to create that burr that we talked about earlier. So 20 to 30 bucks, you can get everything you need. And if you take care of it, it's going to last for decades. Now that sounds good, but what do you use them for? Let's talk about that for a second, specifically from the point of view of a regular homeowner, regular DIYer. Which projects would you really benefit from using a card scraper? Well, furniture refinishing, that's a big one. If you've ever stripped old varnish or paint, you know how much fun that is. Chemical strippers work, but they're messy. They smell terrible. They're not very much fun to work with indoors, if you even can work with them indoors. A card scraper lets you remove that finish mechanically. So no fumes, no sludge, no mess really, at least no slimy, sloppy mess. And you can stay in control of everything, especially on flat surfaces like drawer fronts, tabletops, cabinet sides, things like that. And also, as I mentioned earlier, they're grain agnostic. They don't care which way the grain is going. You can go over joined up sections that are hidden under paint, where the wood grain runs in different directions, and you're not going to hurt the wood. They're great with veneers because they're scraping and removing such whisper-thin strips of wood. So really great for furniture refinishing. Now, if you're dealing with layers and layers of paint or something like that, it might be good to kind of tag team that project, use a chemical stripper or something like that to get the bulk of that off, and then clean everything up with the card scraper. It may not be best if you've got layers and layers of stuff on it, but it's still going to do a really good job. It'll take off varnish. It'll take off pretty much anything. So really great for that. Another place that card scrapers really earn their keep is in glue cleanup. Dried glue squeeze out. You built something, you glued it together, the glue dripped all over the place. This is a great way to get it off, to get adhesive residue off, to get tape gunk off. And keep the wood safe. A scraper is going to remove it cleanly without gouging the wood the way a putty knife might, a razor blade can, all of that. So they're really good for those kinds of things. And then there's final surface prep, which is where a lot of people really fall in love with these things. Sandpaper abrades and crushes wood fibers. A card scraper slices them clean. So you get this beautifully smooth surface with way less dust. And for clear finishes like polyurethane, maybe shellac, tung oil, different things that we talked about in other weeks, if you're using just those on the wood, that scraped surface is just superior to anything else. It's beautiful. However, one thing to add here, if you are planning to use stain, many woodworkers actually go and do a quick pass with like a 220 grit sandpaper over the scraping area, the area that they scrape clean, to give the stain something to grab onto. This is something that not everybody realizes. A lot of DIYers don't realize this, that when a surface is really, really smooth, that smoothness can actually negatively impact your ability to get a particular color with a stain. We've had people really, really polish some trim up, for example, with their sandpaper, even just with sandpaper. They'll go to 320 grit or higher, and they'll really get this beautifully, it just feels beautiful to touch it. But when you put stain on it, the stain just can't penetrate. It's almost polished to the point where it's not going to absorb the stain. That can happen with a card scraper. So a lot of the times, like I said, woodworkers will get it scraped, and then they'll lightly hit it with a 220 grit sandpaper to open up the grain a little bit, give that stain something to bite onto. But even then, even if that's what you have to do and you have to use a little bit of sandpaper, you're still going to be miles ahead of sanding everything from the beginning. All right, those are some typical homeowner uses for this card scraper thing. But if you actually have a wood shop and you love woodworking, well, then you probably already know about these. But if you don't, card scrapers really earn their keep in a few other ways as well. They're going to be great for cleaning up milling marks left by planers and jointers without changing the thickness of your stock. So that's really good. They're going to let you work right up against joinery, tenons, dovetails, dados, without rounding things over the way sanding can do. A lot of woodworkers also use a scraper right before glue ups to expose fresh wood fibers for better adhesion, or to sneak up on a perfect fit when things are just a little bit too tight. Maybe a hair too tight. This is a great way to sneak up on that fit. And after a panel glue up, a scraper is going to level seams evenly without dishing out the surface or causing any kind of damage at all. It's one of those tools that's really going to reward your precision work. You're going to take everything up a notch. I was reading one particular blog post, a guy who runs a wood shop, and he talked about how every piece that he produces went up a notch in quality just because he was using a card scraper. So a lot of uses for a card scraper. And like I said, $8 to $12. Can't really go wrong here, right? Well, there's a but. There's actually 3 different buts that we have to talk about. Because in life, that's pretty much how it always is. No matter how good everything is, there's a but that you got to deal with. With card scrapers, like I said, there's 3 of them. The first but is that technique matters. A card scraper is thin and flexible on purpose. You hold it with both hands, you gently bow it with your thumbs, and that flex does 2 important things. It lifts the corners so they don't dig in, and it concentrates the cutting right in the middle where the burr is doing its work. You also have to tilt the scraper slightly in the direction that you're moving, just a few degrees. Too upright and it's not going to cut, too much angle and it kind of just skates along the wood. Now, some people push them, some people pull them. I've seen a lot of people do both. I think most people probably do a mix of both, once they get the feel for it. Definitely when you're trying this, try both. Once you've got the flex and the angle and you've figured that out and it all clicks, and it's not going to take long. It's going to take a couple of minutes for that to click. Once that happens, you stop getting dust and you start getting long, curly shavings. And that's when that moment happens when you say, oh, thank goodness that little guy from RepcoLite told me about this. All right, so the first but is technique, but you can figure it out. The second but is heat. Things heat up with this little thing. It's just a thin piece of steel, so friction is going to build quickly. Now, some people put tape on the area where their thumbs are, and that will kind of help. I've seen people take business card-sized refrigerator magnets and put them there, where their thumbs sit, and that helps dissipate the heat. It's not ideal because the refrigerator magnet slips around a little bit, so that's not perfect, but it can work. Other people just take a little bit of a break. Still other people will step up to a larger cabinet scraper, and those things have handles. It's not quite the same tool, but it's very, very similar, a cabinet scraper. It doesn't have the same finesse, but it is great for bigger areas, and it's something to know about if you end up loving card scrapers. All right, so that's the second but. The third but is sharpening. Now, card scrapers, and I think this is the biggest of the buts. It's the biggest of the buts, the sharpening. Card scrapers only work, of course, if they're sharp. And when you buy one, they're not going to come, generally speaking, prepared and ready to go. You're going to need to prep it. You're going to need to sharpen it. And you'll need to maintain that edge over time, especially if you're scraping paint, which is going to dull them faster. Now, the good news is that sharpening isn't intimidating once you've done it a few times. You're simply rolling a tiny burr along the edge with a burnishing tool. There's no grinding, no complicated angles or anything like that. And once you get the hang of it, it's going to take a few minutes to do. And if you want to go deep, there are tons of great videos and shop tricks out there from people who swear by these tools. So those are card scrapers. If you refinish furniture, if sanding dust drives you crazy, if you like tools that way outperform their price tag, get one. And when you do, you're going to see all kinds of shapes. Just really quick here, you're going to see rectangular ones, curved ones, gooseneck ones, all kinds of different shapes. And they all have their place, but don't overthink it. Start with a basic rectangular scraper. It's going to handle most furniture and flat work just fine, and you can always add specialty shapes later. Compared to sanding, scrapers are quieter and cleaner. Compared to chemical strippers, they're safer and less messy. Compared to power tools, they're calm. No cords, no noise, no setup. They've got that old school craftsmanship feel to them. And even if you've never used one before, I think you're going to be surprised how often you reach for one once it's in your shop. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about paint choices, mudrooms, bathrooms, guest rooms, kids' rooms. What actually makes sense where? What paint should you pick? We're going to demystify the whole process, and we're going to start right after this. Home in Progress is brought to you by RepcoLite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Think about it. You spend hours prepping, sanding, taping, and then finally painting. Don't throw all that work away with an inferior product. The paint isn't just another supply. The paint is the project. Make sure it's the best. And right now I want to do something a little bit different. I don't know how it's going to work. I'm going to do my best. We'll see how it works. But here's the deal. My kid just bought a new house, and suddenly he's got all kinds of paint questions. And it got me thinking, as I'm answering them, I was thinking that it might be helpful on the radio to walk through an entire home and talk briefly about what paint and finish makes sense in each particular space. Because here's the thing, paint choices get confusing fast. If you're not in it day in and day out, it gets confusing. There are a lot of different products out there, and within each product line, there's a whole range of different finishes. I remember when I started working at RepcoLite like 30 years ago, 29, 30 years ago, I remember wanting to quit in my first few weeks or so because it just felt impossible to learn where everything worked best. It was just so many things to figure out. It took years until you start to feel like, okay, I've kind of run into most of the questions and most of the concerns that I will run into on a daily basis, and I can answer them. So it takes years to get there, and even once you get there, pretty much every week you run into something that's brand new that you've never heard about before or never run into that exact situation. You can always figure out what to do based on other things that you've run into, but it is kind of fun because every week you run into something that really just came out of left field. Anyway, if you've ever felt that way, just confused about all of the paint stuff, you're not alone. And yeah, you just stop in at any RepcoLite and we'll walk you through it. That's one way to go. But even then, knowing a little bit of this stuff yourself is going to be helpful, if for no other reason that when you do walk into RepcoLite, you feel kind of smart. All right, so let's do a quick practical walkthrough of a house and talk about how to make good paint decisions room by room. Because that's my main key. Not so much to tell you which paint to pick, but how to make that decision. But I still will tell you what I think is the best paint for each space. Now let's start with the mudroom. The entry off the garage, whatever that space is in your home, wherever it falls in your house, that's the space I'm talking about. Not the main entry, the foyer, or anything like that. I'm talking the mudroom. The place where shoes and boots get kicked off. Floors get messy. The whole space takes a beating, especially if you have kids. That room. What's the right paint for a space like that? Now, before you can really answer that, you've got to know a few simple things about paint. And this is going to apply to every room that we'll talk about. Now, the first of those things is you've got to understand the role that finish plays. Paint finishes or sheens. They run from flat, which is the dullest, up through matte, eggshell, satin, semi-gloss, and then full gloss. Each step up gets a little shinier. And some companies have other finishes or other sheens tucked away in there. I'm just trying to simplify it here. As sheen increases, as it gets shinier, you're going to gain washability. But you're also going to increase the chance of seeing flaws. So brush marks, roller lines, patches, touch-ups, dents, things like that. Think of it this way. The shinier the paint, the more honest it is. It's going to tell you exactly what's going on your walls. Flat paint, it's a complete liar, but it's a good liar, right? Flat's going to hide imperfections beautifully. It's going to touch up easily. But the downside to flat is it's going to mark up easily. It's going to burnish when it's bumped, and you can't really clean it. Once it's dirty, you pretty much just repaint it. Again, there's always going to be some sort of exception to some of these things, but for the most part, that's giving you the straight scoop. So making your paint choice is always a balance. You got to choose something washable enough for the abuse that it's going to have to hold up to, but dull enough to hide any imperfections or lack of skill if you're not a completely trained painter. If you haven't done a lot of painting, you might want something that's going to hide some of the things that you might bring to the project where you're still learning the skill or the art of it. So you've got to find that balance. That's one thing to know about paint. The second thing to know is the role that quality plays. And I know it's going to sound like a commercial. It's going to sound obvious, but quality really does. It matters a ton. A $20 gallon of paint and a $100 gallon of paint are going to look the same in the can. They both look like paint, but they don't behave the same on the wall. Lower quality paints, they generally go on thinner, they spatter more, they don't level and flow as well, they don't hold up the same way long term. Better ingredients in a product are going to mean better application, better durability, and better results that last. So quality matters, remember that. Now, the last thing I like to think about is what I like to call the paint superpower. Every paint does something especially well. ScuffX from Benjamin Moore. Its superpower, of course, is scuff resistance. Nothing else out there touches it. So high traffic areas, hospitals, schools, elevator lobbies, that's where ScuffX is perfect. Aura from Benjamin Moore, its superpower, amongst other things, but it's probably most famous for its coverage. That's its superpower. 2 coats over pretty much any color guaranteed, sometimes less. Carefree from RepcoLite. It's got a little quieter superpower, but its strength is value. It's going to apply beautifully, hold up well, and cost less. That's what you're really getting there, is a good product for less dollars. So it's perfect for guest rooms, powder rooms, spaces that don't need maximum durability or scuff resistance, places where you're trying to save a buck or two and still get a really good product on the wall. That's Carefree from RepcoLite. There's overlap between products for sure. You can use ScuffX everywhere if you want, but in some rooms, you're going to end up overspending, and in others, there are simply better fits. So think about the paint superpower. And this is probably easier, just ask yourself, what problem am I trying to solve in this room? Knowing what each space needs, or at least knowing what problem you're trying to solve, is going to make choosing the right paint a lot easier. All right, that's the Quick Paint 101 crash course. Now let's get back to that mudroom and walk through the paint selection. Mudrooms, like we said earlier, they generally take a ton of abuse. So your first priority is going to be to get a product and a finish that's going to wash up and resist scuffs and other marks. At least if it's like my mudroom, the kids would kick their shoes off all the time and I had black marks, scuff marks all over the bottom of the wall. So I would be looking for something that's going to wash up and resist scuffs. Well, when it comes to finish, an eggshell is probably going to be ideal. You could go shinier and get more washability, but I think you're going to get enough washability out of an eggshell, and then with that lower sheen, you're still going to have, a little more forgiving finish. It's going to show less imperfections on the wall, less roller marks, and things like that. It's just going to ease up the application process. So an eggshell, I think, would be great. As for product, talking about scuffs, things like that, the ultimate scuff resistance is going to come from ScuffX. So that'd be the best recommendation for that space. Don't skimp in this room. Don't go economical here, because this room sees so much heavy use. You're going to thank yourself later. I painted mine with ScuffX 4 years ago, and it still looks pretty much like I just painted it, because it really has resisted everything the kids and the dogs have thrown at it. So ScuffX for mudroom in an eggshell. I think that's great. What about a bathroom? These are complicated rooms to deal with. Usually the big issue here is moisture. You're going to need a paint that's going to hold up to long showers, lots of steam, you name it. Well, because of that, most of the time, in the past, we would say go to a satin sheen. But now we've got a better option, and it's a win all the way around. Or a Bath & Spa from Benjamin Moore. It's got to be the ideal bathroom paint. It's made to resist extremely high moisture levels, and it comes in a matte finish. In fact, it only comes in a matte finish. So you don't have to deal with a shiny paint in your bathroom. Not everybody wants that. Like I said, not only do you have the imperfections and all of that show with a shiny paint, it's just a look that not everybody wants anymore. Sometimes people do, but if you don't have to have that in your bathroom. You can go with Aura Bath & Spa, get the matte finish, and get a product that's going to outperform the shinier paints. So definitely the way to go in a bathroom. It's premium again, but just like the mudroom, you don't want to skimp in this space. This space really sees a lot of stuff. Bathrooms see a lot of stuff. At least coat their walls with something that's going to hold up to all of what you're going to throw at it. All right, what about a master bedroom? These spaces, they don't usually need the extreme durability that the other spaces that we just talked about, that those spaces need. Master bedroom, I think it's a great space to make a few more economical paint choices. I'm thinking RepcoLite's Carefree or Optima, even in a matte finish, would be great. Perfect for a space like that. You save some money and still get a product on the walls that's going to be perfect. Now, what about a kid's room? Well, it's really, of course, going to all depend on what those walls see. If you're wiping the walls down on a regular basis and worried about things like that, I would think an eggshell finish would be the way to go. I don't think you need to go shinier than that unless you're really wiping those walls down regularly. But an eggshell should be washable enough. And if you want to make sure that it's good and that you don't have to worry about any staining and stuff like that, Regal Select in an eggshell would be perfect. We talked about it already, but Regal has those. It's got stain-resistant technology built right into it. It will hold up to what your kids can throw at it. If it's really crazy in there, it's a throwdown all the time, ScuffX. It's like putting iron on the walls. That might be a way to go. What about a ceiling? When you're doing a ceiling, flat finish all the way, right? The flattest you can find. The ideal product for a DIYer to grab for a ceiling is going to be Benjamin Moore's waterborne ceiling paint. It's dead flat. no matter what color you choose. And that is unique to this product. Most flat ceiling paints, when tinted, are going to pick up sheen from the pigments, but not this one. Benjamin Moore's waterborne ceiling paint, it's going to remain dead flat, whether it's a ceiling white or a navy blue, and that's going to make painting it much, much easier because lap marks and roller marks won't be an issue. The flat's going to hide all of it. What about a hallway? Again, it's going to see a lot of traffic. I would think an eggshell would be fine here because you don't really want a big shiny section if everything else is eggshell in the home. Eggshell should be fine. ScuffX would be extremely great there. Regal Select would be fine. Either one would work well. What's funny about all of this is that there really is no single answer for most spaces when it comes to which paint to use. The big thing that you want to remember is what the sheen is doing for you. Flat finishes hide imperfections but don't wash up. Shinier paints wash like there's no tomorrow, but they show more brush strokes, more roller marks, more imperfections, and things like that. Also, don't forget that the quality of the paint makes a difference. And finally, if you can't remember all of that, just remember to pay attention to what the space that you're painting needs. What are you struggling with in that space? Dirty handprints that you're always wiping down, moisture issues, scuffs from shoes or toys or whatever. Knowing what you're dealing with helps us make the right recommendations when you stop in for paint. All right, my basement, full of boxes of kids' artwork, baby clothes, and memories that have gotten a little bit out of control. Let's talk about how to organize all of that right after this. You're listening to Home in Progress, where the projects are real, the mistakes, they're educational, sometimes painful, mostly educational, and the only thing more stubborn than that old wallpaper on your bathroom wall is your determination to get it fixed. Proudly sponsored by RepcoLite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Paint with a purpose, people who care, and everything you need to get the job done right. Let's keep working to get those storage boxes of memories under control. And today, I'm going to focus on the physical stuff. Not photos, that's physical too, but kids' artwork. Homework, pieces of clothing, you name it. All the stuff that we save because we think it's important. And I want to start with the art first and foremost, because if you have kids or grandkids, they bring home a ton of art. And some of it's really cool, right? And you love it. But some of it, I don't know how else to say it, but some of it really, it's kind of just quantity over quality, right? If we're honest, it's quantity over quality. Yeah, there's children crying right now. And I'm sorry about that, but, it's a wake-up call for everybody. But the kids made it. I understand that. They made it. It's tons of it, and they made it, and they put love into it, and that makes you, just question yourself and question yourself as a parent or as a person, as a human in general when you want to throw it away. And so we end up not throwing it away. We end up saving it and saving it and saving it, and you end up with Rubbermaids full of cotton ball sheep, macaroni collages, you name it. Tons and tons of stuff. I'm looking at that right now in my basement. This stuff fills up 2 4-foot wide, 6-foot tall shelving units. And it's gotten to the point where it's really just a collection of junk because I don't even know what's in there anymore. So what do you do? How do we get on top of all of this? Well, first thing you do is let your kids help you decide. And this can be way more important than it sounds. If the kids are younger, involving them in choosing what to keep is going to help them learn decision-making skills. It really will. It's a really good practice for that. If they're older, you're giving them a lesson, a life lesson that they can hopefully take to their own homes as they move out and get married. Namely, don't stockpile things like this. It's a good lesson to learn. And honestly, when you involve your kids, what's really interesting and really fun to me is that they're often less sentimental about it than we are. Most of the time, they're less sentimental about it than we are. And when they say something can go, let me tell you, that is incredibly freeing. The guilt is minimized dramatically at that point. Now, one simple system that professional organizers recommend is 1 bin per kid. All right, so throughout the year, the best artwork goes in that bin. At the end of the year, you go through it together, you pick the absolute favorite ones to keep, and then everything else gets photographed and recycled. And really, that's probably the key takeaway in all of this. All of these weeks of talking about this stuff. You don't have to keep the physical piece to keep the memory. Take photos, put them in a digital album or a small photo book. One organizer that I was reading online said that she photographs her kids' artwork near a window for good light and then makes a yearly book. And the whole process takes her about an hour. And her kids love flipping through those books every single year. They can see how their art changed over time, and it takes up way less space than bins of crumbling construction paper. Another thing, if you want to display artwork, think in terms of rotation. Clipboards on the wall, magnet frames on the fridge, frames that open so you can stack multiple pieces behind the one on display. The key is to limit the space. That's what you're trying to do here. When it's full, something has to come down. And for three-dimensional projects, clay sculptures, dioramas, things like that, keep them for a while, enjoy them, take photos, but don't feel like you've got to store them forever. That's just a trap. Don't do that. All right, so that's all pretty solid when it comes to, artwork and stuff like that. What about everything else? Baby clothes, old yearbooks, boxes of cards and letters, things you inherited from family. This is where it gets emotionally, it gets tough at this point. Artwork's cool and all of that, and photos are tough to let go. But these things that I'm talking about now, they're physical things that were used or worn or handwritten. You name it. This is where it all gets real. But the good news, according to professional organizers, is that if you've done all of the other things that we've talked about, the photo sorting, sorting through the artwork and all of that, if you've done all of that, you've been working out your letting go muscles. That's their term, not mine. It's a little foo-foo for me, but I'm going with it. You've been working out your letting go muscles. And once you've done that and you're ready to tackle these, bigger items, the physical things, the clothes, the pacifiers that they used, the Crocs they wore, you name it, when you're ready, here are a few things that might help you. First off, again, set clear boundaries. One box per family member, or one drawer, one shelf, whatever works. The limit forces you to curate, to choose only the best of the best. Second, and this is huge, separate the item from the memory, right? Your memories aren't locked inside your stuff. They live in you. And that's true. We all know that's true. But we don't even know what's in those boxes, but we still hold the memories, And so as you're going through things, ask yourself, why am I keeping this? Does it bring me joy, or is it just guilt at the thought of letting it go? Now, sometimes we hold on to things out of obligation. But keeping something out of guilt doesn't really honor the memory. It just adds this layer of guilt to the memory. So just make sure you're separating the fact that these items aren't the memory lives in you, and if it's not bringing you joy, if you're not getting a positive emotion from it, if it's just guilt at the thought of letting it go, that's not reason enough to keep it. And if that's not enough and you're still struggling to let something go, the professional organizers, once again, I'm going to them. I'm tagging them into this match. I'm asking for their help. They're saying, give it a victory lap. Their term, not mine. But the idea is that you use whatever this is one last time with intention. So you make a cup of coffee in your mom's old mug. You wear your grandmother's scarf once more. Those kinds of things. You get the little baby Crocs out and you put them on the table with maybe a little flower in them. I have no idea what you would do with little baby Crocs, but yeah, let them take their victory lap, whatever that looks like. Make the kid wear them around the house one last time and make new memories. And if that happens, take photos and you don't need to save the Crocs. Anyway, whatever you've got to do, let that item have its last little moment, appreciate it, enjoy it, and then let it go. Now, I want to be clear about all of this. It's not about becoming a minimalist. It's not about throwing every single thing that you've ever saved away. It's about being intentional. I need to be intentional. When I'm surrounded by too much stuff, even sentimental stuff, you just can't appreciate what's there. That's how I feel. It's just how it is. It's how we all are. But when you curate these things, when you find the best of the best, when you keep only the most meaningful items and give them a place of honor, that's when they bring you joy and do the work that these things are supposed to do, to jog our memories and help us remember great days. So here's the challenge for the week. Pick one category. Just one category. Photos, kids' artwork, cards, letters, you name it. Pick one category, then set aside a couple of hours, put on some music, make a cup of coffee. You don't have to finish the project. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to start, even if you don't feel like it. Because if you remember last week, action comes before motivation most of the time. Motivation's going to follow. You're going to start feeling like doing this once you start doing it. Probably not before. And once you finish even a small piece of this and you get one organized box, one organized photo book or cleared bin, you're going to feel loads lighter and more organized, and you're going to find tons of great memories along the way. It really can be a pretty fun process. So I'm challenging me. I'm challenging you. Let's see how far we can get. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to catch it again, you can find it online at RepcoLite.com. Whatever you do today, make sure paint's a part of it. I'm Dan Hansen for Home in Progress. Thanks for listening.